Welcome to the deep dive. Look, if your goal is to really nail down the absolute foundations of early American history for, say, a test, or just to get a solid grip on it quickly,
The key dates, the economic drivers, what made these first colonies tick.
then yeah, you are definitely in the right place. Our mission today is, well, to cut through all the extra stuff and give you that expert understanding fast and solid.
We're covering a pretty big chunk of time here, over 150 years. So let's lock in our main anchors right off the bat. We're focusing on 5 really crucial moments.
Okay.
First, the founding of Virginia, 1607. Then Massachusetts Bay, 1630. Jump forward a bit to the Salem witch trials, that's 1692. Then the Stono Rebellion in 1739. And finally, that really important period of salutary neglect, roughly 1714 to 1760.
Got it. Okay, so before we even get into Jamestown or Plymouth, let's maybe zoom out. Big picture first. How were the English doing things differently, compared to Spain and France over here in North America?
Yeah, that's fundamental. It really boils down to purpose and scale. Think about Spain. They were all about conquest, getting wealth fast, setting up this rigid social structure with forced native labor.
The encomienda system,
Right, extracting resources.
Exactly. And the French, mostly focused on the fur trade. They set up smaller outposts, needed alliances with native groups. They were more like partners, initially at least, not looking to just replace everyone.
But the English, they brought something different. Historians call it the populated model.
That's the term.
Yeah.
They weren't just after gold or beaver pelts. They were looking for a new place to live. And that meant bringing over huge numbers of settlers, pushing onto the mainland.
Okay, so massive numbers of people coming over.
Massive numbers. And that completely shapes their relationship with the Native Americans. They weren't primarily trying to convert people like the Spanish or, blend in or trade long term like the French. The English objective was pretty straightforward. They wanted the land, pretty much all the land. And if you have thousands of people arriving who need land for farming, not just trade, well, the outcome seems kind of inevitable, doesn't it?
It does. Constant expansion westward, which leads to, well, much quicker and more violent conflict with native communities compared to what the Spanish or French experienced initially. That's the baseline we need to hold on to.
Okay, so that sets the scene for the 2 kind of foundational colonies that really defined early American identity, or maybe the conflict within it, Virginia and Massachusetts.
Exactly. Those 2 are key.
Right, let's jump to 1607 then, Virginia.
Yeah.
You said the story here is pure, almost brutal commercial drive.
Absolutely. Founded by the Virginia Company, purely for profit, but those early years, a disaster. The dying time, they called it.
Dying time.
Yeah. They were so fixated on finding gold or silver, they kind of forgot about basic survival, food, shelter. Out of the first 120 men, I think only 38 survived the first 6 months. Starvation, disease, just terrible planning.
Wow, so what saved them? It wasn't gold.
Nope, it was a plant.
Tobacco. John Rolfe figured out how to cultivate a marketable strand, and suddenly, Virginia had its cash crop.
Tobacco. And that one crop basically dictates everything that follows.
Pretty much. Especially the need for labor. It's incredibly labor-intensive.
So who did the work initially?
At first, it was mainly indentured servants. These were mostly young, single men from England. They'd agree to work, often under brutal conditions, for like 4 to 7 years just for passage across the Atlantic.
Desperate people, basically.
Very desperate. And honestly, many of them died before their contract was even up, before they ever got the land they were promised.
But that system didn't last forever. There's this crucial shift away from indentured servants towards African slavery, especially in the Chesapeake. You mentioned Bacon's Rebellion in 1676 as a key turning point. Why was that so important?
Bacon's Rebellion, it's huge. It wasn't just some minor uprising against the governor. What really terrified the wealthy elite, the planters, was that Bacon managed to unite poor white settlers and enslaved black people.
Against the ruling class. Exactly, under this common banner of, class anger. So the big takeaway for the elite was, we cannot let this happen again. We need to divide the labor force. By making race, not class or contract status, the fundamental dividing line. Solidify race as the marker for who is permanently enslaved and who isn't. This really accelerated that shift to African chattel slavery by the late 1600s, a system based on race forever.
Okay, so Virginia, founded for profit, saved by tobacco, reliant first on indentured servants, then shifting hard towards race-based slavery after Bacon's Rebellion. Now let's contrast that sharply with the North. Massachusetts Bay, founded 1630, and Virginia was about cash.
Massachusetts was about creed. Absolutely. This is the Great Migration era, waves of Puritan families coming over.
Puritans, so deeply religious.
Highly religious, highly educated reformers. They followed John Calvin. Their goal was to create a new English Israel, a reformed Protestant community that would be an example to the world. Governor John Winthrop famously called it a city upon a hill.
And the society they built looked totally different from Virginia's scattered farms.
Completely different, very town-oriented, highly literate. Sources show they set up public schools pretty early on, even for girls, which was unusual. And the government was fundamentally theocratic.
Meaning religion and government were basically fused together.
Yeah, interwoven. But here's the central paradox, right? Religious intolerance.
That seems strange. If they were fleeing persecution from the Church of England, why turn around and kick people out for disagreeing, like Roger Williams?
Well, from their viewpoint, it wasn't hypocrisy. Dissent wasn't just disagreement, it was seen as a direct threat. A threat to the purity, the stability, the whole city upon a hill experiment.
So Williams was seen as dangerous.
Doubly dangerous. First, he questioned their right to just take native land without paying for it. A second, and this was huge, he argued for a complete separation of church and state.
But his reason for separation wasn't to make the government secular, right? It was actually to protect the church.
Yeah, exactly. To keep the messy, grubby business of politics away from religion, protect the church's purity.
And they banished him for that in 1636.
They did, and that banishment was critical. He goes on to found Rhode Island. And Rhode Island becomes this haven, really, for religious dissenters. It's the first colony to genuinely practice religious tolerance and allow a real diversity of thought.
So Williams gives us that separation concept. But who's actually overseeing these colonies day to day, whether they're commercial like Virginia or religious like Massachusetts? We should touch on the colonial governors.
Right, the governors, they were the king's man on the ground, appointed directly by the monarch back in England.
Were they respected?
Often not really, no. Colonists tended to view them with suspicion. Many were seen as, unskilled men just looking for a cushy job, a lucrative post far from London.
But they had real power.
Oh, immense power on paper. They had a veto power over laws passed by the local assemblies in, like Virginia's House of Burgesses or the town meetings up in Massachusetts.
But there's a weird dynamic there, isn't there? Colonists might resent the local governor.
But they often still felt this deep, almost kind of romantic loyalty to the distant king or queen in England. It's a strange split.
Yeah, that tension between local control and crown authority. It seems like it's always just simmering under the surface.
Always. It's a constant theme.
Okay, let's quickly nail down the core identity for two other major colonies founded a bit later. The Restoration colonies. First up, Pennsylvania. What are the keywords for you?
Pennsylvania. Okay. William Penn. Quaker. Tolerance. Pacifism. Diversity.
Unpack that a bit.
So Penn sets it up with Quaker principles. That means no mandatory church taxes, religious tolerance guaranteed for most Christians, which was rare. And pacifism, he famously made treaties with the Lenni Lenape tribe, actually bought land fairly instead of just taking it.
Sound almost progressive for the time.
It really was. It became the most cosmopolitan colony, attracting settlers from all over Europe, not just England. And they got rich through grain farming, the breadbasket colony.
Okay, tolerance and grain in Pennsylvania. Now contrast that with South Carolina. What's the defining feature there?
South Carolina. Brutal efficiency, maybe. It started as a colony of a colony. Planters moved over from Barbados, bringing that incredibly harsh Sugar Island plantation model with them.
And they focus on rice, right?
Massive rice plantations. And rice cultivation needed a huge amount of labor, just tremendous.
Which led to
the highest concentration of enslaved people anywhere in North America. We're talking a black majority, often 60, maybe 65% of the population.
Wow. What does that demographic reality create in the white society?
Fear. Constant pervasive fear of rebellion. That fear shaped everything about the culture for the white planters.
And that fear wasn't just theoretical. It exploded in 1739 with the Stono Rebellion. Tell us about that.
Right, Stono. It was a major slave uprising in South Carolina, led by a man named Jemmy. A group of enslaved people fought their way south, trying to reach Spanish Florida.
Why Florida?
The Spanish were offering freedom to enslaved people from the English colonies if they reached Florida and converted to Catholicism. It was a beacon of hope.
Did they make it?
No, the rebellion was ultimately crushed. But the response from the colonial government was immediate and chilling.
What did they do?
Sheer terror drove policy. They passed the Negro Act of 1740. It was basically a legal architecture designed to strip away any remaining rights or autonomy from enslaved people.
Like what specifically?
It severely restricted their lives, no assembling in groups, restrictions on travel, and crucially, it made it illegal to teach enslaved people to read or write. Total control was the goal.
We also need to hit that other major crisis, the one rooted in the religious intensity of the North. Salem witch trials, 1692.
Ah, Salem. Yes, that crisis really could only happen in that intense conformist Puritan world. You had a deeply misogynistic society where women were already seen as more susceptible to the devil.
But it wasn't just about religious belief, was it? Historians point to other factors.
Definitely. There was huge external stress from King William's War, constant fear of Native American attacks on the frontier, and internally, lots of social friction. Conflicts between the established, often wealthier people in Salem town versus the poorer farmers in Salem village. Young women accusing older, sometimes more independent women. It was complex.
19 people executed in just 1 year. The speed of it all is terrifying.
It is. And the fact that society later issued apologies shows they recognized the hysteria. It was like the theocratic pressure cooker just blew its lid.
Okay, so we've got these distinct colonial identities. Virginia's commercial drive, Massachusetts' religious mission, Pennsylvania's tolerance, South Carolina's brutal rice slavery complex. Despite these huge differences, what did all the English colonies generally share? What were the common threads?
Good question. I'd say 3 main things. First, surprisingly maybe, quality of life. On average, English colonists actually had a higher standard of living than people back in Britain.
Really? How so?
Better diet generally, longer life expectancy. They owned more stuffed clothes, furniture, basic goods. Land was more available initially.
Okay, quality of life, what second?
Culture. The key word is Anglicization. They weren't trying to be American yet. They saw themselves as English subjects abroad. They kept English customs, followed London fashion, read English thinkers like John Locke. The elite even sent their sons back to England for university.
Right, staying connected to the mother country. And third,
Economics. All colonies operated under the system of mercantilism. The fundamental idea was that colonies exist only to enrich the mother country, England.
and this was enforced by laws.
Yes, primarily the Navigation Acts. These laws put heavy restrictions on colonial trade.
Can you give an example, like that Virginia tobacco planter we mentioned?
Right, say he grows the best tobacco. The Navigation Act said he couldn't just sell it to, say, the Dutch, even if they offered the best price. Nope. Certain key goods, tobacco, sugar, rice had to be shipped only to England or maybe another English colony, and usually on English ships.
So England gets first dibs and controls the shipping. How did colonists react to that?
They hated it. Absolutely hated it. The response was widespread smuggling, bribery,
Yeah.
basically ignoring the laws whenever they could get away with it. And often, local juries wouldn't convict smugglers. There was a lot of quiet resistance.
Okay, widespread resistance to economic control. And this brings us to that key period you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
salutary neglect, roughly 1714 to 1760. What exactly was that?
Salutary neglect. It basically means the English government, especially under Prime Minister Robert Walpole, deliberately chose not to strictly enforce those navigation acts.
They just looked the other way. Why?
Walpole kind of believed that commerce thrived best with less interference. His thinking was basically, if the colonies are busy making money, even if they're bending the rules, then England ultimately benefits too through trade. Let sleeping dogs lie, essentially.
Okay, so decades of lax enforcement. What was the consequence of England not cracking down?
Huge consequences. It allowed the colonial assemblies, those locally elected bodies, to gain enormous practical power. They controlled local budgets, levied local taxes, paid the governor's salary.
Blah, the power of the purse.
Exactly. So a whole generation, maybe 2, grew up under this system where they were effectively governing themselves in many day-to-day matters. They got used to it. It fostered the sense of autonomy.
But salutary neglect wasn't just neglect, it was practice. Practice for self-rule.
That's a great way to put it. It inadvertently created this American mindset that was accustomed to a high degree of self-governance. And that perception, that expectation, is going to clash violently when Britain tries to tighten control again after 1760.
Okay, one last crucial comparison before we wrap up. Slavery. We know it existed everywhere, but you stressed the experience was vastly different, North versus South. Let's break that down.
Yeah, this is really important. So southern colonies, think Virginia, South Carolina. Slavery is central to the economy. High concentration of enslaved people, maybe 40% in VA, over 60% in SC.
And the work.
Large-scale agriculture, tobacco, rice, huge plantations. Enslaved people lived in larger communities, sometimes hundreds together in quarters, often quite separate from the owner's house.
But that scale had a devastating human cost for families.
Absolutely devastating. Marriage often wasn't legally recognized or respected. Families were routinely broken up, children sold away from parents. The system actively destroyed kinship bonds.
Okay, now contrast that with the northern colonies, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania.
Much lower concentration of enslaved people, maybe 10% in New York, even less, under 5% in Massachusetts. Slavery existed, but it wasn't the absolute engine of the economy in the same way.
What kind of work did they do?
More varied. Domestic service in homes, skilled labor in ports like Boston or New York, some farming, but not on that massive plantation scale, usually only 1 or 2 enslaved people per household.
So, smaller communities, more direct contact with the enslaver's family. Did that change things like family life?
It seems so, to some extent. Because of the smaller scale and closer proximity, marriage was more likely to be recognized, or at least tolerated. Children were less likely to be sold away. Families had a better chance of staying together, relatively speaking.
And religion.
More exposure to Christianity in the North, partly because of the closer living arrangements, but also because of the religious intensity of Puritan and Quaker societies. They were more likely to try and convert the enslaved people living among them.
So even under the shared horror of slavery, the specific economic and social structures of North and South created profoundly different lived experiences.
Profoundly different. 2 distinct societies emerging, really, even by the mid-18th century, shaped by those initial founding differences, commerce versus creed, and solidified by things like salutary neglect and the different paths slavery took.
Which brings us right back to that moment around 1760, where everything starts to shift.
Exactly. So if you're pulling this all together, what's the big takeaway? I'd argue it's understanding that salutary neglect wasn't just some passive phase, it was active training.
Training for what?
Training for defiance. These colonial assemblies got used to running things, raising militias, passing local laws, managing money. They acted like mini parliaments.
So here's the final thought, the question hanging in the air as we leave this period. What happens when the British Crown, after letting the reins go slack for 50, 60 years, suddenly decides to grab them tight again? To impose new taxes, enforce those old laws.
How ready and how willing will these colonists be to fight to keep the practical power they've grown accustomed to? That's the crisis brewing, something for you to think about.